Wij mensen hebben onszelf lang aan de top van al het leven op aarde gewaand. Wij zijn slim, dieren zijn dom. Maar de laatste tijd weten dieren ons steeds vaker te verrassen. We zien filmpjes van octopussen die zich niet laten inmaken. Kraaien en otters die puzzels oplossen. Eksters die onze rotzooi opruimen in ruil voor eten. Of walvissen die een ingewikkelde taal blijken te hebben.
What a time to be alive. These fantasy stories that we used to tell children about talking animals that you could understand. My daughter, I think it's very possible she would be able to talk to animals.
We beginnen de taal van dieren steeds beter te begrijpen. Maar als we dieren beter begrijpen, gaan we dan ook anders naar dieren kijken?
Should they get rights?
Bees. That's a difficult question.
En gaan we dan alleen anders kijken naar dieren die we lief, mooi of nuttig vinden? Of geldt dat voor alle dieren? Als we beter gaan luisteren, wat zouden we dan ontdekken?
I remember seeing it above me in the air, coming down and thinking, I'm going to die now. And then I was underwater and somehow I was not in the kayak anymore and I could just see white. I opened my eyes underwater and it was just white. And then I was kind of thrown around and I think that was the whale using its tail to swim away, and I think we just got caught in the eddy.
He knocked it over. He knocked it over, the kayak.
And then I was quite deep underwater. I had to swim back up to the surface. And then I got up and I looked around and I thought Charlotte was dead for sure because the whale had landed on top of her, I thought. But she was there and she was fine and we were both totally unharmed. The other really kind of intense encounter was in the Dominican Republic. Humpbacks, even though they're very big, they have a very impressive awareness of where the edges of their bodies are. And because they have these big pectoral fins, they can move really gracefully. And so the whales would come right up and they would look at you with their eye, and then they would turn and they would put their pectoral fin out and it would come past and it would be like this far from you. But they never touched you. And they would go down and then they would sing these long songs. They're like 25 minutes long. And they have repeated units in it, like music, and structures like music, and you can start to hear tunes in it. And so you would be on the surface looking down, and underneath you this gigantic animal singing, and the sound goes through the water and it vibrates your chest, and your mask is vibrating, and all the air spaces, your whole body is just moving with the song of these animals. And then the whale will finish the song, come to the surface, breathe for like a few moments, and then go down again, and it will repeat the exact same song again. And when you sit there for an hour or so, you start to recognize the same repeating patterns, and it becomes familiar to you, and you start to really understand that it is a kind of music.
Als walvissen zingen, waar zouden ze dan over zingen? Kunstmatige intelligentie werkt steeds beter bij het vertalen van mensentalen. Zou het ook kunnen werken bij dieren?
One of the biggest problems in understanding animals is understanding their communications. It's hard to record them, and we find it hard to find patterns in there. Like if they have a language, it's very hard for humans to see it because we are trapped in our own language. These machines don't have that problem. They can go through more like recordings of sounds than a human could listen to in a lifetime, and they can perceive patterns in huge recordings that humans cannot. And then when you correlate that with what the animals are doing, who they are, what the context is, what else is happening, then you can start to make hypotheses about what these communications mean. And when you do that, you can start to have a different way in to animal communications than the way we would have before. And we can take these tools that we've developed for finding patterns in our own communications and find them in the patterns of other animals.
Tijdens het schrijven aan zijn boek over walvissen stuitte Tom op een grootschalig onderzoek naar de taal van potvissen dat in kaart wordt gebracht met behulp van kunstmatige intelligentie. Een van die onderzoekers is Michael Bronstein.
So that's how it sounds.
Michael is computerwetenschapper. Hij probeert patronen te ontdekken in walvisgeluiden. En hij heeft onlangs voor het eerst een potvis in het echt gezien.
A bit, I should say, a bit scary and a bit, I don't know, a humbling experience. Such a big animal, very majestic. What you see here are different colors. Different colors represent different animals, different whales. And the color here consists of 5 clicks. What changes is its duration over time, and then there is some synchronous behavior. Different whales produce similarly looking sounds. And there is some kind of following behavior here between these two whales, the red and the green.
So they're talking?
Yep, at the same time. One of the things that we are trying to understand is if there is any planning. So if there is a conversation, they discuss, for example, how to forage, how to hunt the giant squids in their next dive, and basically what precedes the decision to dive. So at some point they stop chatting and then they start diving. So there might be some patterns that are typical for this decision. Then another thing is we can try to communicate back. So we can have a chatbot that like human chatbots, right? So they don't really, you cannot say that they really understand, right? So, but they produce a plausible output that you can interact with this chatbot and even think that this is a human. So it potentially even passes the Turing test of intelligence. So probably something like this can be done with whales. So we would be able to have a device that communicates with the whale responds. And by basically by recording this communication, we hope to be able maybe to understand better the meaning of what they say.
But aren't you afraid that you will insult them by accident?
That's a good question. So yeah, potentially it's possible. It might also change their behavior or disrupt the way that they live. So yeah, there are probably more dire implications, right, than just insulting. For sure, we'll be very careful if we ever do it. It is probably the craziest project that I have ever seen. So it's just the question itself from my childhood. So fairy tales and stories about where people would normally communicate to animals. I think people have always wondered about whether this is possible and whether we could communicate to animals regarding animals as our peers rather than abusing them or killing them. So I think if we find something like this, like whale or non-human species communication or language, we understand that these are intelligent animals that can talk and then can express themselves. I hope it will also change the way that we treat animals eventually.
Samadhi Galbayage Duna publiceerde vorig jaar een verbluffend onderzoek waaruit blijkt dat bijen het leuk vinden om te spelen.
What's happening?
She's rolling a ball. So there are some bees that once they move one ball, then they'll try another one.
So now it's playing.
Yeah.
She has no reason to do this, right?
Exactly. And as you can see, the bee can definitely avoid the balls. There is a lot of space to walk around them. She's not getting any food for doing this, or any other obvious function.
So she loves this.
Looks like. What we're doing is taking these creatures into the lab and giving them a task that they've never experienced before. And we're asking, okay, show me what you got. How far can you go? And so it really tells us that, okay, just because you didn't happen to see it in the wild, because maybe they're too busy surviving, doesn't mean they're not capable of it, doesn't mean their brain doesn't have the capacity to solve these seemingly complex tasks. And so I can't help it. I want to learn more and more about them, like what can they do with their tiny brains? Because actually they're quite clever creatures. And even if their brain might not be as big as ours or other mammals, they have actually quite sophisticated learning abilities. They can make memories and they can solve problems, which is of course important for survival. And then you see all these individual differences. It's impossible not to wonder whether they might feel something. It doesn't mean that they feel the way we do, but is there some kind of emotion-like experience? Is there some kind of subjective experience? And so these are very fascinating and cool questions to ask.
We weten dat bijen nodig zijn als bestuivers. Maar ze kunnen ook tellen. Gezichten van mensen herkennen. Ze gebruiken gereedschappen. En ze doen de bijendans. Een dans waarbij ze in een loopje aangeven waar voedsel te halen is. De lengte van de dans geeft aan hoe ver ze moeten vliegen. De richting die ze opdansen geeft aan welke richting ze op moeten vliegen ten opzichte van de zon.
First of all, it's mind-blowing in itself. So this sort of sophisticated symbolic communication is not found in other non-human animals, actually.
Is it a language?
I think that's debated. So it's definitely a form of communication, but say some people would say that language has more component and is a bit more complex than the waggle dance. I mean, maybe it would be strange for a human to perform a waggle dance to show where to go, right? 'Cause maybe it's not relevant to our way of life, like our ecology. But for the honeybees, that maybe is the most effective form of communication. But it's also just simply fascinating that other creatures see the world completely different to us. And so these findings of animals feeling some kind of pleasure, some kind of suffering, then points into the direction that, okay, these are sentient beings, these might have some kind of consciousness. And so there is some duty for us to maybe translate these into policies, to do something about looking after them and protecting them legally.
What should we do?
So, personally, I think I've always wondered, why do humans think they're so special? And why do we think we're so superior than all the other animals, other non-human animals, because we're animals too?
Should they get rights?
Bees. That's a difficult question.
De afgelopen jaren deden wetenschappers de ene na de andere ontdekking over dieren. Muizen kunnen het verdriet van een andere muis voelen. Koeien hebben beste vrienden en ervaren stress als ze gescheiden worden. Olifanten communiceren met elkaar over enorme afstanden en rouwen om hun doden. En omdat bewezen is dat nu ook octopussen pijn kunnen ervaren, worden zij nu in het Verenigd Koninkrijk voor de wet erkend als wezens met gevoel.
Well, there is evidence that the octopus is a very clever creature and it can solve certain tasks, solve problems, and looks like a sophisticated animal. And with bees, I would say we're not that far off in terms of what we're discovering about cognition and this growing new evidence of something like pleasure or something like pain. But I would say if it worked for the octopus, we will probably get that with bees as well. But whether that gets translated to policy in practice, I don't have the answer for that.
Hoe meer we over dieren leren, hoe meer compassie we met ze hebben. Diana Rice is dolfijnonderzoeker en ze ontdekte dat dolfijnen zichzelf in de spiegel herkennen en zichzelf bekijken. Maar ook dat dolfijnen spelgedrag vertonen door ringen in het water te produceren. Dit soort onderzoek heeft de mens anders naar de dolfijn doen kijken. Maar heeft het dan ook geleid tot betere wetgeving?
Alrighty, thank you so much. Appreciate your help. It's not just about applying science that gives us policy changes. We as a species, we as humanity have to think about, given the fact that we've learned about these animals in this way, that we know that these are highly sentient, highly social animals with this level of social and self-awareness. How are we going to treat them? And, you know, we're hopeful that it will have effects on ethics and policy, because it really is a matter of ethics. How do we take those facts? How do we take that information that we know now? What do we do with that information? How do we act as a species?
Waar de meeste landen de dolfijnen en walvisvangst verbieden, doet Noorwegen er nog aan mee. Diana zet zich als wetenschapper in voor Valdimir, een ontsnapte beluga.
A beautiful white whale that was termed spy whale. He kind of hit the news. Either escaped or was released from Russian waters several years ago, and he's now, this beautiful beluga whale named Valdimir is in Norwegian waters, and people in Norway have fallen in love with him. So now we have a town in Norway that wants to build the first whale sanctuary. One of the things that struck me as a scientist over all these years is that it's easier for us to wrap our heads around one individual, one lost whale, than it is to protect a whole species or populations. And for that reason, I think it's important for those of us who study cognition and communication to share the information at that level about who these animals are. These are animals with individual personalities. We now have frameworks to talk about personality in animals. That was taboo for years. My hope is that the more we appreciate them as individuals, living in social groups, like us, caring for young, showing empathy for others, even outside of their own species often, we're going to relate to that.
All around us in all of our lives are these, communications between animals. If I go to the park and I see the crows calling to each other, I want to know what they're saying. I know they're not just saying the same thing over and over. I know that to do this effort for them, to disrupt their lives and spend time talking to each other, there must be some important information being transferred. But for so long, we have been unwilling to try and find out what it is.
You can hear it. Can you hear it? Chip, chip, chip. Chip, chip, chip. Should we go and find some more?
What?
You go find some more. Okay, let's go.
It's really exciting right now because it feels like in the human culture, we care. It's not controversial to think that different animals have different personalities. It's not controversial to think that they think in complex ways or communicate. And now, at the same time as that cultural change, we have these tools to investigate it.
Oh yeah, that's it. Can you hear it? It's doing up there now. Chip, 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 chip.
What a time to be alive. that these fantasy stories that we used to tell children about talking animals that you could understand, my daughter, I think it's very possible she would be able to talk to animals. If I'd have said this 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed it. But seeing all of these tools and seeing all these people who are very clever applying themselves with these tools, taking this seriously, gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, look, there it is up there. There it is.
I look at some of the stuff that like the big tech guys are doing, and I find it quite boring. And I'm not interested in Mars. I think Mars is a boring place to go. But the sea is full of giant animals with huge brains that have been around for tens of millions of years. They might be the only other intelligent life in the universe, and they're right next to us. And we have a chance to talk to them, to understand how they see the world. Like, I think if there is a moment, the first two-way conversation between another species and us, that will be huge in our culture. Like, it will be like the photograph of Earth from space. We'll understand our context. Why hasn't animal communication been taken as seriously as finding subatomic particles or distant galaxies? Like, why don't we have a human genome project for animal communication?
Basically, we have aliens living literally under our feet, right? Or something that is as close as possible to Martians on Earth that live in a completely different environment, communicate in a completely different way. And yet, somehow we look into the sky rather than looking into the sea. So yeah. I don't know why. I don't have an explanation.
It drives me mad. I feel it's like it would be like so farcical if they went extinct and then we went to Mars or just explored the universe and there was nothing else. And we were like, oh, that was our chance.
Yeah, because with extraterrestrial hypothetical creatures, we have never actually observed anyone. With whales, we see them all the time, right? Yeah. And we know that they're intelligent. We know that they communicate in some complex way. So that would be probably, how to say, low-hanging fruit to study, so to say.
Low-hanging whales.
Yeah.